I had not heard my wolf in 11 years. Not truly heard him, not the low resonance behind the ribs that means he is awake and present, not the warmth at the base of the throat that means he sees what I see and cares what I care about. 11 years of silence from the creature that was supposed to be the other half of my chest. I had grown so accustomed to the absence that I had stopped waiting for him to speak. A king does not wait. A king moves, decides, commands. The waiting is something else, something I had buried under campaigns and councils and the daily governance of a hold that needed me whole, and I had learned, or taught myself, to be whole without the half that was missing. The morning it changed, I was in the great hall. The hall at Vlthorn is a cold place in autumn. The river takes the warmth out of the air by the time the season turns, and the stone walls hold the cold the way stone always does, thoroughly and without apology. I had grown up in this hall. My father had ruled from this hall and his father before him, and the iron throne at the end of it was as familiar to me as my own hands, which meant I had long since stopped seeing it. I sat in it the way a man sits in a chair he has sat in 10,000 times, present in body, elsewhere in mind, carrying out the business of the hold because the hold required it. The healer from the capital stood before me. She was the fourth one my council had brought this season, which meant she was the fourth one who would fail, though I did not say that aloud. My council was not wrong to try. They were dutiful men who understood, better than I would ever admit, that a king whose wolf had gone cold was a king whose hold was vulnerable, not to armies, but to the slow rot that comes when the one who is supposed to feel everything feels nothing. They brought healers because it was the only remedy they knew. I received the healers because it was the only courtesy I could offer. This one was younger than the others. She came recommended by 3 different pack lords, and she carried herself with the composed confidence of someone who had earned results and knew it. She was not unkind. She knelt at the edge of the dais, not because protocol required it, but because she understood the gesture mattered to a court that was watching, and then she reached toward my wolf. My wolf lay on the stone floor to the left of the throne, the way he always lay, present and still and utterly silent, like a carving someone had placed there as decoration. He was large, even for a king's wolf. His coat was the color of river ice in the last light of winter, pale, almost colorless. 11 years ago, he had been the most restless, most vocal creature in the hold, always pressing at the edges of what I would allow him to feel, always pulling me toward things I hadn't noticed yet. Now he lay as though the idea of moving was something that had simply stopped occurring to him. The healer put her hand near his muzzle. He did not flinch. He did not growl. He did not do anything at all, which was its own kind of answer. I watched her face, watched the small adjustment in her expression when the wolf gave her nothing, the professional recalibration, and I felt the familiar weight of it settle back into my chest. The fourth one, same result. She tried for an hour, and I allowed it because she had come a long way and deserved the attempt, and then I thanked her and my steward arranged her accommodation, and she left the hall with the particular dignity of someone who had not succeeded but would not show it. My council dispersed. I remained in the throne and listened to the river. The Southern Watergate guard arrived mid-afternoon. He came in at a half-run, which meant something had happened, and I straightened in the throne before he reached the dais. In Vlthorn, a half-running guard means either a border breach or something at the river, and this was the season when the current was dangerous. The autumn swells that came down from the Highland watershed and turned the Watergate crossing into a test of nerve and good timber. 3 of Cassin's wolves, my lord, he said, catching his breath. They collapsed at the river crossing. We don't know if it was the current or the cold or something they ate further up the trail, but they're bad enough that the men couldn't move them past the dock. I stood, the pack's healer. Still 2 days out, my lord. They were traveling ahead of her, but he paused, which was unusual for him. There's a woman at the dock, a traveling healer. She was already there when we arrived. She'd been treating dock workers all morning. Keld says she walked straight to the wolves without being asked, and she's been working on them for the past hour. I looked at him. Results. The worst of the three is sleeping, breathing steady. The other two are letting her touch them. I had brought 4 healers into my great hall in the past 6 months, and not one of them had gotten my wolf to lift his head. A stranger at the dock had calmed 3 injured animals in an hour without being asked. I went to see. The southern Watergate at Velthorn is not a beautiful place in the way that the Great Hall is, not the austere beauty of cold stone and iron fittings that my ancestors had built to last. The dock is a working structure. Rope and timber and the smell of the river, which in autumn smells of cold metal and wet earth, and the particular green sharpness of moving water. The boats were tied up against the current, tugging at their lines. Dock workers moved around them with the unhurried efficiency of people who had been doing this all their lives. She was at the far end of the dock, in the notch between the last 2 pilings where the boards widened out into a kind of rough platform. She was kneeling on the wet planks, and she did not look up when I arrived, because she was working. 3 wolves lay around her in the half-collapsed posture of animals that are sick but not gone, present enough to be aware, too depleted to do anything about it. The largest one, which Keld's description had marked as the worst, was lying with its head across her knee. She had one hand resting at the base of its neck and the other moving in slow strokes down its flank, and she was talking to it, not in words I could make out from where I stood, just a low, steady murmur, the kind of sound that does not demand anything, that simply exists alongside the creature and lets the creature decide what to do with it. My steward beside me made a small sound that I recognized as surprise. I understood it. The wolf on her knee was large, pack-trained, not a domestic animal, the kind of creature that would ordinarily have made a stranger's presence a problem rather than a comfort. It was not making a problem of her at all. I stood at the edge of the platform and watched. She noticed me after another few minutes, not with alarm but with the calm attention of someone who had registered the new presence but was not yet at a stopping point. She finished what she was doing, a slow, deliberate completion of whatever sequence she had been following, and then she looked up. She had steady eyes. That was the first thing I marked about her, not the pale color of them, which was unusual, somewhere between gray and the silver of water at overcast noon, but the quality of the steadiness. She was looking at me the way she had been looking at the wolves, attentively, without performance, assessing, but not afraid. She was not young, and she was not old. Somewhere in the middle of her life, which gave her a kind of settled quality, a face that had been through weather and carried it well. Her hands, when I looked at them, had the roughness of someone who worked with them constantly. Her traveling clothes were plain and practical and wet at the knees where she was kneeling, and she had apparently not noticed or did not mind. "My lord," she said. Her voice was level. She did not stand immediately, which I noted. She finished easing the wolf's head off her knee first, settled the animal carefully before she rose, and only then got to her feet and stood before me with the composed attention of someone who respected the protocol without being afraid of the person. "You're the traveling healer," I said. "Senna," she said. "I was at the dock when your men arrived. The wolves needed help. The pack's healer is 2 days out." "I know, your gate captain told me." She looked at me directly. "2 of them can be moved now. The third one," she glanced at the large wolf on the boards, "needs another few hours. He took in water at the crossing and the cold got into his chest. I've drawn most of it out, but I want to be sure the lung is clear before he travels." I had been told this same thing before. The formulation is, I believe, or in my assessment or my recommendation, is the careful hedges that experienced healers use, because they have learned that certainty offends lords who are used to being right. She had not hedged. She had stated the situation. "Who trained you?" I asked. "My mother," she said. and the pack healer in Orith for 4 years, and 11 years of traveling after that. She said it without pride and without apology, the way someone states facts they have simply lived rather than curated. I work the river towns mostly. I go where I'm needed. No pack affiliation. No. I looked at her for a moment. Behind me, my steward was making the small sounds of a man who was waiting to be told what to do next. The dock workers had given us a wide berth. They knew who I was, even without the markings, because a man with an escort of 4 soldiers and the bearing that comes from ruling something is usually who he appears to be. Senna appeared to know who I was, and appeared to have decided that it changed nothing about how she would speak to me, which was plainly. "Finish what you're doing," I said. "When the wolf is ready to travel, speak to my gate captain about arrangements for Cassin's men, then come to the hall." She looked at me, a brief assessment, not suspicious, just thorough. "Why?" she asked. My steward's small sound stopped entirely. "Because," I said, "VLTHORN has several court wolves that need attention before the cold sets in, and the pack healer we contract is currently occupied in the North Hold." It was true. It was also not the whole reason. I was not yet certain what the whole reason was. Senna looked at me for another moment. Then she nodded once, a clean, efficient nod, and knelt back down beside the wolf. I walked back up the dock and did not look behind me, which was a discipline I had developed over 20 years of being a man whose uncertainty needed to remain invisible. She came to the hall that evening. My wolf heard her before I did. I know that now, looking back. I understand what happened in those first seconds before I was consciously aware of her arrival. I had been sitting with my steward going through the season's inventory figures, the kind of work that occupies the hands and leaves the mind somewhat vacant, and I was watching the door without meaning to when she walked through it. The moment she crossed the threshold, something happened at the left side of my chest that I had not felt in 11 years. A movement, a pressure, a sensation that was not pain but was close enough to pain in its suddenness that I set down the ledger without quite knowing I was doing it. My wolf lifted his head. I stared at him. He had not lifted his head for the healer from the capital. He had not lifted his head for any of the others. He had not lifted his head for me, if I was honest about it, not with any real attention, not for years. He lifted it now and turned it toward the door, and the pale eyes, the eyes that usually looked at nothing, focused on Senna crossing the hall toward the dais with the same steady attention she had given everything else. She stopped when she reached the edge of the dais and looked at me. Then she looked at my wolf, then back at me. "He's beautiful," she said, with the simple directness of someone who is not trying to ingratiate themselves, just stating what they see. My wolf stood up. He had not done that either. I managed not to show what this was doing to me. 11 years of practice in not showing things is not wasted. I said, in a voice that I kept level, "You can approach him if you wish." She looked at me again, that brief assessment, and then she walked toward the wolf the way she had walked toward the animals on the dock. Without hurry, without performance, without any of the deliberate caution that trained healers use when they are trying to communicate safety to a dangerous creature. She just walked toward him the way she would walk toward any living thing, and my wolf walked toward her. They met in the middle of the hall floor. He pressed his muzzle into her palm and stood there. I had to look at the ceiling for a moment. When I looked back, she was running her hand along his jaw with the same slow attentiveness she had used on the dock wolves, and my wolf, the creature that had been silent and cold and absent for 11 years, was making a sound I had forgotten he was capable of making. Low, contented, present. "He's been closed off for a long time," Senna said, not to me but in the general direction of the wolf, the way she had murmured at the animals on the dock. "Something hurting him or something missing. You can feel it." She looked up at me. "How long?" 11 years, I said. She absorbed this without particular drama. "He'll come back to himself," she said. "It takes time. Whatever closed him off, the opening works the same way. Gradually, something he trusts. She did not ask what had closed him off. She did not look at me with the loaded attention of someone waiting for a confidence. She simply went back to the wolf. I sat with the ledger in my hands for a long moment, looking at the two of them on the floor of my great hall, and I thought, something he trusts. I found her chambers in the east wing, near the healing room that opened onto the rock-faced terrace above the river. That terrace was the best place in Velthorn to see the water in autumn. The angle caught the morning light, and from the right position you could see the current all the way down to the water gate, the whole silver length of it through the trees. I had spent a good deal of time on that terrace as a boy. I had not been there in years. The arrangement I offered Senna was straightforward. Velthorn had 6 court wolves in need of assessment before the winter cold arrived, plus the ongoing care of 2 older animals that the court healer had been managing before he took ill. She would take over the court wolves' care through the season, with accommodation and board and a wage that was fair without being extravagant. She had evaluated the offer with the practical eyes of someone who knew what fair wages looked like, and was not about to argue with one. She had agreed. My counsel was not openly troubled by this, because there was nothing to openly trouble them. She was a working healer filling a working need, and the arrangement was sensible. But I noticed things. I noticed the way my council members looked at one another when I mentioned her. I noticed that Davin, my chief counselor, had made a point of asking 3 careful questions about her credentials, the kind of questions that are not really about credentials. I noticed that the court paid attention to where she moved, and how she spent her hours in a way that people pay attention to things they have not yet categorized. None of them knew about my wolf. Or rather, they did not know what my wolf's response to her meant. They had seen the wolf lie still for years. They had not seen him stand up. I knew what it meant. I had known since the moment on the dock when I had watched her kneel on wet planks without a second thought, and talk to injured animals as though their recovery was a matter of patience and listening, and nothing more complicated than that. I had known it with a certainty that lived below words, the kind of certainty that a man who has spent 11 years training himself not to feel things finds remarkably difficult to argue with. She was the mate my wolf had been waiting for. I had not known until she arrived that he had been waiting. I had assumed the coldness was permanent, that whatever had gone out of him on the day I made myself into what my pack needed had simply gone out, the way coals go out when you stop feeding them. The silence had been so long that I had stopped calling it absence and started calling it the shape of my life. She did not know any of this. She knew she was a healer in a river-hold court, working through a season. She knew the wolves' names and their conditions and their dietary needs, and the particular hours of the day when each of them was most receptive to her hands. She knew, I think, that my wolf was unusual, that his response to her was something beyond the ordinary, but she attributed it to the same patient attentiveness she offered everything, and I had not told her otherwise. This was, I was aware, not entirely fair to her. But I had been a man of controlled distance for so long that I did not know how to close it without being certain the closing was right. So I watched, and my wolf watched, and the weeks moved. The healing chamber above the river was lit in the mornings by a particular quality of light that I had forgotten existed in Velthorn. The way the water reflection caught the stone walls and made them seem less cold, less fixed, more like living surfaces. I found reasons to be near the terrace in the mornings. I did not manufacture them. There was always something legitimate, always some report or inspection or conversation that could plausibly take me past the east wing. I was a king. A king goes where governance requires, and if governance sometimes required me to be within earshot of the terrace at the hour when Senna sat with my wolf before the court wolves arrived for their morning treatments, then that was not a thing I needed to examine too closely. My wolf began going to her on his own. This was the second time in 11 years that he had surprised me. He had always stayed close to the throne when I was in the hall, not out of loyalty, exactly, more out of inertia, the way that cold things stay where they are placed because there is nothing drawing them elsewhere. The first time I noticed him walking the hall corridor toward the east wing without me, I stopped in the middle of a conversation and watched until he disappeared around the corner. My steward finished my sentence for me, which he was accustomed to doing, and did not comment. After that it became a morning pattern. My wolf in the healing chamber. Senna's voice, low and easy, not performing, not trying, just talking to him the way she talked to all her animals, as though they were capable of understanding more than they were given credit for. The court wolves had taken to her with an enthusiasm that had nothing to do with her treatments and everything to do with the quality of attention she gave. She was not sentimental about animals. She was precise. She saw what they needed, she gave it, she moved on. But the moving on was never abrupt. There was something in her working rhythm that suggested she understood that trust was extended and not demanded, and that the only response to trust was to be worth it. I understood this from watching her. I am not sure I had understood it before. The night the ambassador arrived was 3 weeks into the arrangement, on an evening when the first real cold of winter had come down off the watershed, and the river was running silver in the dark. I was in the hall with my counsel when the gate captain brought word that an envoy from the eastern packs had arrived requesting hospitality. A pack lord named Urin, traveling with a small escort, seeking a night's shelter and a brief audience in the morning. It was ordinary enough. Pack lords traveled, hospitality was protocol, I granted it. I did not know, until the morning audience, that Urin had taken note of Senna. He was a compact man with the particular confidence of someone who had been small and learned to compensate for it early. He sat across the council table from me and framed his requests with the smooth language of diplomacy, and most of what he said was genuinely routine, trade adjustments, a disputed stretch of the Eastern Road, the usual seasonal concerns. I dealt with it efficiently. I was ready to conclude the audience when he said, with the same smooth transition he had used for everything else, "I understand you have a healer in residence, unaffiliated." I went still in a way that I did not allow to reach my face. "VLTHORN has a healer in residence," I said. "Contracted through the season." "Of course," he tilted his head slightly. "Only an unaffiliated healer represents a somewhat unusual situation. No pack protection, no formal standing. The Eastern packs have been looking for a skilled traveling healer for some time. It occurred to me that if her arrangement here is informal, she might be open to a formal contract with us, a more permanent situation." He spread his hands. "More security for her as well." There were 8 people in the room with me. My counsel, Urin's 2 aides, the gate captain standing at the door. My wolf was not in the hall. He was, at this hour, almost certainly in the healing chamber. I thought of that for a precise moment, before I thought of anything else. My wolf in the healing chamber, present and alive and attentive in a way he had not been in 11 years, because of the woman this man was describing as unaffiliated and therefore available. "Her arrangement here," I said very evenly, "is not informal." Urin blinked. "My lord." "VLTHORN is her pack." A silence. Urin looked at me with a calculation that he was trying to keep out of his eyes and not entirely succeeding. "She has not taken pack standing." "She will." Another silence, longer this time. Davin, my chief counselor, had gone very still beside me in the way that people go still when they have suddenly understood something they should have understood weeks ago. I stood. Not abruptly. I was not angry in the way that Urin's careful maneuvering was perhaps designed to provoke, the territorial anger that makes a man sloppy. I was the other kind of steady, the kind that comes from being very certain about something. Urin read it. I could see him reading it. He was a practical man. "The Eastern Road adjustment," I said. "We'll finalize that now. The other matter is resolved." He resolved it. The audience concluded. I walked out of the hall and down the east corridor, and I did not stop when my steward called after me, because I had done 11 years of stopping and I was finished. She was on the terrace. It was cold, the morning air sharp with the first real cold, the river below the terrace running dark and fast with the autumn current. She had a blanket around her shoulders that she had clearly pulled on as an afterthought rather than a deliberate preparation for cold, and she was watching the water. My wolf was beside her, pressed against her leg, and he did not leave her side when I stepped through the terrace door. She turned and saw me. Whatever was in my face, I was not certain what it was. I was not accustomed to my face carrying things I had not chosen to put there. She assessed it without alarm. That steadiness, that quality she had of not being moved by the surface and looking instead at whatever was underneath it. "You heard," I said. "I heard enough," she said. "The gate captain's aide told me there was a lord at the morning audience who was asking about unaffiliated healers." She looked at me directly. "What did you say?" I said VLTHORN was your pack. She was quiet for a moment. The river moved below us fast and silver dark. "Is it?" she asked. And here was the thing. She did not ask it as a challenge or as a test, or as the kind of question that is designed to make a man stumble. She asked it the way she asked everything, plainly, wanting to understand what was true. I had spent 11 years not saying true things aloud, because I had decided that a king's uncertainty was a danger to his hold, and that everything which was not certainty should remain private until it could be shaped into something clean and manageable. The habit was so deep that I could feel it resisting, right now, even as I stood on this terrace with the woman my wolf had been waiting for, and a cold morning and a choice. "The bond woke when you walked into the hall," I said. She stared at me. 11 years, I said. He had been still for 11 years. He stood up when you crossed the threshold. He has spent 3 weeks in your healing chamber. He is beside you now rather than beside me. I looked at her steady as I could be, which was not as steady as I usually managed. "You are my mate. My wolf has known it from the first moment. I have known it since the dock." I paused. "I did not tell you because I was not certain you would." I stopped. Started again. "I wanted you to be here because you chose to be. Not because I had claimed the right." The silence between us was very long. The river made its sound below us. My wolf sat between us and looked at nothing, in the contented way of a creature that has reached the place it was looking for and has no further requirements. "The wolf stood up," she said slowly. "Yes." "When I walked in." "Yes." She looked at my wolf for a long time. At his pale coat, his pale eyes, the way he was sitting with his side pressing warmly against her leg. She looked at him with the expression she used when she was understanding something, not surprised exactly, but rearranging. "I thought he was choosing to trust me," she said. "I thought it was patience, that I was being patient with him and he was responding." She looked up at me. "It was more than that." "Yes. You could have told me." "I know." I held her gaze. "I was afraid you would leave if I did." It was the truest thing I had said aloud in 11 years. I had not known I was afraid of it until I said it, and then I knew it had been true the whole time, that I had kept the knowledge back not out of strategy, but out of the old, plain, ordinary fear that the thing you most need will take itself away if you name it too soon. She was quiet. I waited. "The bond," she said. "What does that mean for me? I'm not pack-born. I don't know the traditions the way someone raised in this." "It means," I said, "that if you will have it, you are mine and I am yours. In the old language that means a great deal. In the plain language, it means I want to spend the rest of my life making certain you have no reason to regret it." Senna looked at me for a long time. She had steady eyes, this woman. She looked at me the way she looked at the wolves, attentively, past the surface of things, at what was actually there. I held still under it and let her look. A king does not beg, but a man can stand on a terrace in the cold and let the woman who has remade the best part of him look at him as long as she needs. She reached out. Not to me, to my wolf first. She put her hand on his head, the way she had that first evening in the hall, the same slow settling touch she gave every creature in her care. My wolf's eyes closed. The low, contented sound came again. And I felt the bond complete. It was not a flash. It was not the sudden blaze I had been told it would be when I was young and being told things about mates by men who had had them. It was warmer and quieter than that. The way a cold room feels after a fire has been burning in it for an hour. Not sharp but thorough. The warmth in the walls and the floor and the air all at once. Unmistakable once you could feel it. I exhaled. "All right," she said softly, which was not quite an answer and also entirely one. I put my hand over hers where it rested on my wolf's head. Her fingers turned and held mine. I named her before the court 3 days later. Not because protocol required a ceremony. The bond does not require a ceremony. The bond requires only that both parties know what it is and accept it. But the court needed to know, and the court needed to hear it from me. And there was a tradition in VELTHORN for how a king does this, and I intended to honor it. She stood beside me in the great hall, not because I had placed her there, but because she had walked there herself when I asked her to come to the hall at the noon hour, and she had stood where it made sense to stand, which was beside me. She had not dressed for it particularly. She was in the clean version of her traveling clothes, the good ones, the wool that was warm and well-made, and she had not tried to be anyone other than what she was, which was a healer from the river road who had walked into a hold on an ordinary day and done what she did, which was see clearly and touch carefully, and let the things she touched come back to themselves. My wolf stood between us. My counsel stood along the wall. Davin, who had understood first and said nothing since the morning audience, was watching me with an expression that took me a moment to identify: relief, not the political kind, the other kind. The court stood in the hall, the stable masters and the gate guards and the kitchen staff, and the river dock workers and the soldiers, and all the people who make a hold run and who are, if a hold is any good at all, the hold. And they were quiet in the waiting way of people who know something is about to be said. I spoke the declaration in the old tongue. It is not a long statement. It does not need to be. In the old language, the word for mate and the word for matched and the word for found are the same word. There is an elegance to this that I had always appreciated abstractly and now appreciated with the whole of my chest. I spoke her name in the old tongue, which is a permanent thing. Once spoken that way, in that hall, in that context, it cannot be unspoken, and I said what it meant, and I said it clearly. Senna stood beside me and listened with her steady eyes. When I finished, I looked at her. "What did you just do?" she said quietly, which was near enough to the question she had asked me on the terrace that I almost smiled. "The same thing I said on the terrace," I said, "in the formal version." She absorbed this. Then she looked out at the hall, at my counsel, at the court, at the dock workers standing in the back who had come in from the cold to see what the noon gathering was about. They were looking back at her. Davin bowed. Not the formal bow of protocol. The other kind, the kind that comes from something earned rather than required. He bent at the waist and stayed there, and beside him, one by one, the counsel followed, and the hall followed, the way a current follows the shape of the bed that holds it, without discussion, without signal, simply because it had found the direction it was looking for. My wolf, who had been still and cold for 11 years, sat beside Senna's heel and watched them bow, in the easy, dignified manner of a creature that has been waiting for this for a long time and finds it entirely correct. She looked at me. "I'll need to learn the old tongue," she said. "I'll teach you. And the traditions." "Yes. And the court wolves' winter schedules. They're all due for their full assessment before the first frost." "Senna." "What?" I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had knelt on wet dock boards without a second thought, and talked to injured animals as though their recovery was simply a matter of being patient with them, who had walked into my hall and given my wolf the first living attention he had received in 11 years, who had not known what she was doing and had done it anyway, who was now standing in the great hall of VELTHORN, with the court bowing around her, and her first concern was the wolves' winter assessment schedule. "The wolves," I said, "will be seen to." She looked at me with the steady, seeing eyes, and she smiled, not the large, warm smile of someone performing gladness, but the small, certain smile of someone who has found where they are supposed to be and is allowing themselves to know it. "Good," she said. My wolf pressed his side against her leg, warm and present, and finished with silence. I understood him entirely. The Eastern ambassador sent a formal acknowledgement 2 weeks later, a diplomatic note of the kind that means no hard feelings, and also I understand completely. It was correctly worded, and I answered it correctly, and that was the end of Urin's interest in unaffiliated healers in VELTHORN. The court wolves came through the winter in better condition than they had managed in years. Senna said this was because their treatments had been delayed and she was simply catching up the deficit. I said nothing, because she was probably right, but also because the wolves had begun doing a thing they had not done before, which was to position themselves near her when she was not treating them, near the terrace, near the healing chamber, near whatever part of the hold she happened to be in. It was not protocol. It was the other thing, the thing she had without trying, the quality that made creatures in her presence feel that they were being genuinely attended to and not simply managed. I was learning what this felt like from the inside. It is different being attended to. I had been managed all my life, by my father, by my counsel, by the careful diplomatic machinery of a hold that needed its king whole and predictable. There was nothing wrong with it. Management is what governance requires. But to have someone look at you with steady gray eyes and see not the king but the man underneath, and then to see the king too and not confuse them for each other, this was different. This was something I had not had since I was young enough not to know what I was missing. Senna learned the old tongue with the same methodical patience she applied to everything. She was not a quick student. She was a thorough one, which is not the same thing, and is better. By midwinter she could read the hold's older records without difficulty, and she had opinions about them that she expressed to me in the direct way she expressed all opinions, and I found myself revising things I had thought were settled, because her questions turned out to be the right ones. She was not, and would never be, a court woman in the traditional sense. She did not move through the hall with the cultivated grace of someone trained for it. She moved through it the way she had moved down the dock, purposefully, without performance, headed somewhere specific. The court adapted, because courts are better at adapting than their inhabitants realize, and because Senna treated everyone in the hold with the same attentiveness she gave the wolves, and it turned out that people, not unlike wolves, respond to that by choosing to be near her. One evening in the deep cold of midwinter, I found her on the terrace. The river was frozen at the edges but still running dark in the center channel, the current too strong for the cold to hold. The light was low and blue, the kind of light that comes just after the sun drops below the highland ridgeline and the whole world goes very clear and very quiet. She was standing at the railing with her hands wrapped around a cup of something warm, watching the water. My wolf was beside her. He had taken to sleeping at the foot of the bed she had been given, which had been her bed until it was our bed, which had happened with the same quiet inevitability as everything else between us, confirmed by action rather than declaration, the way things become true not because someone announces them, but because they simply are. I stood beside her and watched the river. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, because I was learning to ask rather than assume, and because her answers were reliably interesting. "The dock wolves," she said. "Cassins 3, I heard they made it home well. The report came last week." Good. She was quiet for a moment. I was also thinking about you, she said. About the hall the first day. How you looked when your wolf stood up. I thought about that. How did I look? She considered it. Like someone had said your name in a language you thought was lost. She glanced at me. Like something you'd stopped expecting had arrived anyway. I looked at the river for a moment. That is exactly what it was, I said. She was quiet. Then she put her hand through my arm, the way she did when she was content and not trying to say anything complicated, just acknowledging that I was there and she was glad of it. My wolf leaned against us from the other side, solid and warm and present. Below us, the river moved in the dark, the way it always had, the way it would long after us, but tonight it seemed less indifferent than it usually did, less like something happening without reference to the people who lived beside it. Tonight it seemed like a witness, patient and old and glad in whatever way rivers can be glad, that the thing it had been watching approach for 11 years had finally arrived. I put my hand over hers on my arm and held it. That is how I remember it in the end, not the great hall with the court bowing, not the formal declaration in the old tongue, not the moment on the dock when I watched her kneel without hesitation among the injured animals and understood that my life had just changed. I remember the terrace and the blue midwinter light and her hand in mine, and my wolf leaning warm against both of us, and the river below finding its way in the dark. He had been waiting 11 years. So had I, though I had not known it. I had called the waiting something else, discipline, governance, the work of being what the hold needed. I had built walls against feeling the absence, and had become so skilled at the building that I had nearly convinced myself the inside of the walls was enough. She had not torn the walls down. She had simply walked into the hall with her steady eyes and her unhurried hands, and my wolf had stood up, and the walls had become beside the point. That is the whole of it. That is all a mate is, in the end, the one beside whom the walls become beside the point. The one who sees not the king you made yourself into, but the man who was always there underneath, still waiting, still keeping the door open, who sees both and does not confuse them, and whose hands are patient enough to find the one who was hidden. I had been a man of controlled distances for 20 years, and VLTHORN had not suffered for it, and I did not regret the discipline. But there is a difference between a hold that is governed and a hold that is alive. The difference between the cold stone of the hall in October and the same stone in midwinter, when there is fire in every hearth and the warm river smell of living things in every corridor. Senna made it alive. My wolf knew it first. He always knew, the way wolves know, not through argument or evidence or the careful weighing of considerations that men rely on, but through the simpler, older knowledge of being present in the same space as the thing you were meant to find, and recognizing it the way you recognize a sound you have been straining to hear. He had been waiting 11 years. He was not waiting anymore.